Hello and welcome to the financial results for the period ended March 31st, 2020 and corporate update from Mesoblast. An announcement and presentation have been lodged with the ASX and are also available on the home and investor pages at www.mesoblast.com. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question and answer session and instructions will follow at that time. As a reminder, this conference call is being recorded. Before we begin, let me remind you that today's conference call, the company will be making forward-looking statements that represent the company's intentions, expectations or beliefs concerning future events. These forward-looking statements are qualified by important factors set forth in today's announcement and the company's filings with the SEC, which could cause actual results to differ materially from those and such forward-looking statements. In addition, any forward-looking statements represent the company's views only as of the date of this webcast and should not be relied upon as representing the company's views of any subsequent date. The company specifically disclaims any obligations to update such statements. With that, I would like to turn the call over to Dr. Silviu Itescu, Chief Executive of Mesoblast. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Operator, and welcome everybody to the financial and operational highlights for the third quarter ended March 31st, 2020. We could go to slide 4, please. This slide highlights the 3 pillars that underpin Mesoblast's technology platform and our product pipeline. Our innovative platform is based on allogeneic mesenchymal precursor cells and their progeny, mesenchymal stem cells, which have well-characterized immunomodulatory mechanisms of action and which allow us to target the most severe and life-threatening inflammatory conditions. Underpinning this is a very global, strong intellectual property estate. Our lead product candidate is Ryoncil, being developed for pediatric steroid-refractory acute graft-versus-host disease. A BLA has been filed with the FDA, and the FDA has designated this as under priority review with an approvable PDUFA date set for September. If approved, launch for this product will be in 2020. We have industrialized scale manufacturing in place to meet the commercial demand for the product, and we have learnt greatly from the continued growth in royalty revenues from a similar product in Japan, where it's being sold by our licensee for acute graft-versus-host disease. Beyond GVHD, we have a plan in place for life cycle extension for remestemcel-L for pediatric and adult inflammatory conditions. We'll be talking a lot today about a phase 3 trial that is ongoing in 300 patients using remestemcel in acute respiratory distress syndrome due to COVID-19. In addition, two additional product candidates are in phase 3 trials, one for heart failure and one for chronic inflammatory back pain, both with near-term U.S. readouts. Next slide, please. This slide identifies the mechanism of action of our product candidates and our platform technology. Cellular therapies are activated by multiple inflammatory cytokines through surface receptors. This results in an orchestration of an anti-inflammatory cascade and a concomitant downregulation of multiple arms of the immune system that are implicated in the inflammatory conditions we are targeting. Next slide. This slide shows the pipeline of our phase 3 product candidates. As you can see, remestemcel-L is being developed for a range of pediatric and adult systemic inflammatory conditions, the first of which is acute pediatric graft-versus-host disease. We are also in a phase 3 program for respiratory distress syndrome due to COVID-19, and we'll be talking a lot more about that. Our Rexlemestrocel platform technology is being developed for localized inflammatory conditions, and 2 products from that platform technology, one are being developed for phase 3 indications, one for chronic, advanced, and end-stage heart failure, and the second for chronic inflammatory low back pain. Both are in phase 3, and both will have readouts around mid-year. Next slide. We have commercial scale manufacturing capabilities in place. Our technology is able to be scaled for off-the-shelf usage. The manufacturing meets stringent criteria of international regulatory agencies. We have robust quality assurance processes in place that ensure final product with batch-to-batch consistency and reproducibility. We have current capacity that is sufficient to meet our commercial needs for the Ryoncil launch for acute GVHD. We do project an increase in capacity requirements as our pipeline matures, including for graft-versus-host disease label extensions, for Remestemcel-L, and for COVID-19 ARDS. To achieve this increase in capacity requirements that's projected, we will be using proprietary xeno-free technologies to increase yields and output. We will be moving to three-dimensional bioreactors to reduce labor costs and improve manufacturing efficiencies. And these innovations will significantly reduce in the future our cost of goods. Next slide. Underpinning what we do and the products that we're developing is a very strong global intellectual property estate with patent protection extending through at least 2040 in all major markets. We have over 1,000 patents and patent applications in these major jurisdictions. Our patents cover compositions of matter, manufacturing, and therapeutic applications of mesenchymal lineage cells for all of the areas that we're developing products. Our patents provide strong global protection to our core commercial areas of focus and allow us to grant rights to third parties who require access to our patents in order to commercialize their products when those products fall outside of our core commercial areas. Next slide. So with that as a backdrop, I'd like to ask our Chief Financial Officer, Josh Muntner, to present our financials.
Thanks, Silviu. It's truly an exciting time at Mesoblast. Turning to slide 10, I've highlighted items from our income statement where we've seen tremendous growth in revenue and reduction in our operating loss for the 9 months ended March 31st, 2020. Total revenue grew 113% to $31.5 million from $14.8 million for the year earlier period. The key components of total revenue are commercialization revenue and milestone revenue. Commercialization revenue, which is royalty revenue collected from JCR Pharma from their product Temcel, grew 81% over the period over period comparison, growing to $5.9 million for the 9-month period from $3.3 million for the year earlier period. Milestone revenue from our strategic partnerships grew 127% to $25 million from $11 million. The milestone revenue of the current 9-month period reflects the $15 million upfront payment from Grünenthal received in late 2019, and also are recognizing $10 million of revenue related to our license agreement with Tasly Pharmaceuticals. Regarding non-revenue highlights, we had a 34% reduction in loss after tax. This was partially driven by the increased revenue, as well as due to a reduction in R&D expense, which declined by $7.5 million, or 15% when compared to the year earlier period. When looking at the 3-month period for March 31st, for the 3-month period ended March 31st, 2020, we observe a sharp increase in total revenue, growing tenfold from $1.2 million to $12.2 million. The increase is due to the inclusion of the Tasly upfront payment, but also a 100% growth in royalty revenue to $2.1 million from JCR Pharmaceuticals for sales of their product Temcel used in the treatment of GVHD in Japan. Moving to slide 11, we'll pause for a moment to review our relationship with JCR, a Japanese company focused on commercializing products for orphan markets. JCR has exclusive rights to our MSC technology for acute GVHD in Japan, which is where they commercialize Temcel. They introduced the product in 2016 and have steadily grown the sales, leading to a consistently rising royalty paid to us. As shown on the chart on the right part of the slide, during the last 12 months, ended March 31st, 2020, we recognized $7.6 million of royalty revenue from JCR. Our success in launching Temcel and the rapid adoption the product has seen in Japan informs our potential for the U.S. launch of Ryoncil if approved by the FDA. We know, however, that there are some differences between the Japanese GVHD market and what we expect to see in the U.S. We estimate that the U.S. market is 8 times larger than Japan. The size differences are due to population differences, of course, between the two countries, but also take into account differing incidence of GVHD between the two regions. In Japan, there's a lower incidence of GVHD due to the makeup of the patient population. Finally, we expect there to be a price difference between Temcel's pricing in Japan and Ryoncil's potential pricing in the U.S. Overall, we've enjoyed a very productive relationship with JCR and look forward to their continued success with Temcel and in developing the product for other therapeutic areas, including epidermolysis bullosa and HIE. Moving to slide 12, we find the entire income statement for the 9-month period. I've already covered the growth seen when comparing the recent 9-month period to the prior period with respect to revenue. I've also highlighted the reduction in our R&D expense, primarily related to reduced spend on our clinical and preclinical development activities. Cost savings here are in part offset, however, by increased spend on manufacturing, which you can see rose approximately 20% to $15.5 million in the recent 9-month period. Overall, however, we do see as already noted, a reduction in loss after tax. Finally, on slide 13, I'd like to mention one of the key items from our balance sheet, which is our cash position. Cash on hand at March 31st, 2020 was $60.1 million. We raised $90 million earlier this month, receiving strong support from existing and new institutional investors. This results in a pro forma cash position of $150 million. The proceeds from this offering will be primarily used towards scale-up of manufacturing for Remestemcel-L in the treatment of acute respiratory diseases, acute respiratory distress syndrome due to COVID-19, as well as for the commercial launch of Ryoncil for acute GVHD. In addition to the pro forma cash position of $150 million, up to an additional $67.5 million may be available through our existing strategic partnerships and our ongoing financing facilities over the next 12 months. We believe that this puts our cash position and available cash in a great spot to be able to maximize the value of our assets. As always, additional information regarding our financial results have been posted to the ASX and the SEC, as well as to our website. I'd like to hand the call back to Silviu now to review our operational and corporate highlights.
Thank you, Josh. Joining us also on this call is Dr. Fred Grossman, our Chief Medical Officer, and he will be available to discuss together with me any questions around our operations in the Q&A session. Let's go straight to slide 15. So acute graft-versus-host disease remains a significant problem and a market opportunity for our lead product, Ryoncil. Slide 16, please. To just re-emphasize, the fundamental problem here is that severe inflammatory grade CD disease results in severe mortality risk, up to 90% mortality in grade D disease. And these mortality outcomes have not changed over the past few years. Given that our anti-inflammatory therapies target the most severe degree of inflammation, we're focusing our therapies on these severe grades of the disease where mortality continues to be a problem. Next slide. In a phase 3 trial, Remestemcel-L in 55 children failing steroids, 89% of whom had grade CD disease, demonstrated significant benefit in terms of day 28 overall response and day 100 survival. And these outcomes were superior to those from a matched cohort of children, matched for disease severity in a contemporaneous consortium called the MAGIC Consortium across the US and Europe. Day 28 response was significantly better in our phase 3 trial, as was day 100 survival. Next slide, please. These data, together with published data from 2 other studies, one where Ryoncil was used in an open label fashion in patients who had failed multiple biologics, again where 80% had grade CD disease, and a third study where Ryoncil was used as first-line therapy in a randomized placebo-controlled phase 3 trial of 260 adults and children with steroid-refractory acute graft-versus-host disease. All 3 studies provide the support to the BLA that has been filed for Ryoncil with the FDA and that is under priority review. The FDA has set a prescription drug user fee act PDUFA date of September 30th, and if approved, Ryoncil will be launched in the U.S. in the 4th quarter. Next slide, please. This slide demonstrates life cycle extension strategy that we've put in place for Remestemcel-L. Planned U.S. launch later this year for Ryoncil in pediatric steroid-refractory GVHD will be followed, we hope, by a subsequent launch in COVID-19 ARDS, and beyond that, the expanded indications in chronic GVHD, adult acute GVHD, and other inflammatory conditions, including other causes of acute respiratory distress syndrome. Let's move now, the next slide, to the devastating complication of acute respiratory distress syndrome due to COVID-19. Slide 21, please. COVID-19 is a respiratory virus with a very high mortality rate due to severe inflammatory condition of the lungs, which is called acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. ARDS is caused by a cytokine storm due to a severe inflammatory response to the very virus that is in the lungs. And it is the primary cause of death in patients with COVID-19. We have an extensive safety data set using Remestemcel and its anti-inflammatory effects in patients with acute graft-versus-host disease. And those data and a shared mechanism of action made for a compelling rationale in moving to evaluate whether Remestemcel-L has a place in the treatment of COVID-19 ARDS. In addition, we have known for quite some time that intravenous delivery of Remestemcel-L results in its selective migration to the lungs, making inflammatory lung disease an appropriate target for this therapy. Remestemcel therefore has the potential, mechanistically and for other reasons, to tame the cytokine storm specific to ARDS, and may therefore offer a life-saving treatment to those unfortunate individuals who suffer from COVID-19 ARDS. Go to the next slide, 22. This slide summarizes the clinical and pathophysiological features of ARDS. And ARDS, of course, is caused by COVID-19, but traditionally has been caused by a variety of different viruses and bacterial infections. It remains a major unmet medical need. As I've mentioned, multiple triggers can cause ARDS, and typically the immune response to the inciting agent, whether it's a virus or a bacteria, results in extended intensive care hospitalizations and interventions using ventilators. Mortality rates in ARDS ranges from 40% in those caused by influenza to 80% when caused by COVID-19. Pathophysiology is activation of immune cells in the lungs, particularly macrophages and T cells. And when activated, these cells secrete a range of damaging cytokines, so that whilst they're battling the inciting agent, such as COVID-19, the cytokines that they release result in bystander destruction of the lung tissue, influx of additional immune cells, aberrant secretion of fluid by the lung alveolar cells. Ultimately, the patient has severe fluid and the entire lung fills up with fluid and inflammation and destruction. Slide 23. So more specifically, the rationale for using remestemcel is its anti-inflammatory mode of action. The COVID-19 virus is known to stimulate a cytokine storm in the lung and results in release of cytokines and biomarkers such as TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, interleukin-8, hepatocyte growth factor, and interleukin-2 receptors, all of which reflect the macrophages and the T cells that are wildly activated in the lungs. When remestemcel arrives in the inflamed lung, its surface receptors are activated by these very major inflammatory cytokines, including TNF and IL-6. Engagement of these receptors results in secretion by remestemcel of multiple well-defined anti-inflammatory factors that switch off multiple arms of the immune system, macrophages, B cells, and T cells, much as they've been shown to do in acute graft versus host disease. This results in reduction of the cytokine storm and reduction in the very cytokines that have initiated it, such as TNF-alpha, interleukin-8, hepatocyte growth factor, and expression of IL-2 receptors. And these are the very same biomarkers that are significantly impacted and reduced by remestemcel in acute graft versus host disease. Ultimately, the anti-inflammatory and additional reparative factors that can be produced by remestemcel have the potential to reverse ARDS, protect alveolar epithelial cells, and improve lung function. Let's go to slide 24, please. So the rationale was clear, and we moved quickly to obtain pilot data under an emergency IND in New York to provide clinical rationale for moving forward with an appropriately randomized controlled trial in COVID-19 ARDS. The data from the compassionate use we previously published, 12 patients with moderate or severe ARDS on ventilators who'd failed all other therapies received 2 infusions of remestemcel-L at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. The choice of the 2 infusions at 2 million cells per kilogram was that the protocol used was identical to the standard protocol we are using today in acute graft versus host disease. Well-established protocol with a lot of safety data behind it. 9 patients of the 12 successfully came off ventilator support at a median of 10 days following the second dose, following initiation of the first dose, and were discharged from hospital. Strikingly, this contrasts with only 9% of COVID-19 patients in the same city, in the same hospital networks, being able to be extubated within the same time frame, and only a 12% survival rate for such severe patients. And when we talk about the disease severity, we're talking about moderate to severe ARDS by criteria called the Berlin criteria for ventilation. These are very, very severe patients with a very high mortality rate and inability to be weaned off ventilators. Based on these very positive data, striking data, we moved rapidly to initiate a confirmatory phase 3 trial in up to 300 patients randomized 1-to-1 to either remestemcel or placebo. Primary endpoint of the trial is day 30 mortality. Key secondary endpoint is days alive of ventilator support. The first patients have been randomized and dosed in early May, and this trial is currently recruiting. We expect to have up to 30 sites and contracted, and you'll hear a lot more about this trial in the short term. Next slide, 25, I think summarizes again in more detail what I've just said in terms of objectives, trial design, primary and secondary endpoints. If folks would like a lot more detail on this trial, I'm sure that Dr. Grossman will be happy to address any questions on the trial itself. Slide 26, please. This slide highlights now the key milestones that we anticipate to see over the ensuing months for remestemcel-L in COVID-19 ARDS. Recruitment is expected to take 3 to 4 months. A first interim analysis is planned for when 30% of patients have reached the primary endpoint of 30 days. And we will seek expedited regulatory approval subject to positive data readouts. In the interim, we need to anticipate for positive outcomes and be in a position to scale up manufacturing to meet the projected increase in capacity requirements for both COVID-19 ARDS and overall our maturing pipeline. And to do this, we will seek to increase our manufacturing footprint for capacity expansion. We will be implementing proprietary xeno-free technologies to increase yields and output, and we'll be starting to plan for the longer-term transition to 3D bioreactors in order to reduce labor and improve manufacturing efficiencies. In addition, we will be seeking to establish manufacturing and commercialization partnerships as these high-volume opportunities start to read out. Finally, let me conclude the operational update in regards to our heart failure and chronic low back pain products. Slide 28. For our back pain product candidate, MPCO6ID, we have a strategic partnership in place to develop and commercialize the product candidate in Europe and Latin America with Grunenthal. For our product Revascor for heart failure, we have a relationship in place for exclusive cardiovascular partnership with Tasly Pharmaceuticals. Both of these product candidates are in phase 3 in the U.S., and at this point in time, we retain 100% of the U.S. commercial rights for the products. Slide 29. Revascor for advanced and end-stage heart failure. In December, the phase 3 trial for advanced heart failure surpassed the number of primary endpoint events required for trial completion. Final study visits for all surviving patients have been completed. There is an ongoing quality review of all the data. It will be completed shortly at the study sites. The data readout is planned for mid-2020, and the results may support regulatory approval in the U.S. Recently, we presented results from a sub-study of 70 patients with end-stage ischemic heart failure and a left ventricular assist device of a total of 159 randomized patients who received either Revascor or saline, and these results were presented by the independent trial investigators at the American College of Cardiology virtual scientific sessions end of March. The conclusions from that study were that the NPCs had a beneficial effect on the ability to wean the patients off the LVADs, beneficial effect on major mucosal bleeding, serious adverse events, and a reduction in readmissions due to ischemic heart failure. The end-stage ischemic heart failure patients with LVADs are older and have comorbidities such as diabetes, and therefore closely resemble the majority of the patients in our 566-patient phase 3 trial for advanced chronic heart failure. These results were therefore very encouraging in that context. Let's move to slide 30, summarizing where we are with MPCO6ID for chronic inflammatory low back pain. The phase 3 trial of this product candidate is in 404 patients that has completed enrollment, and all patients have been followed up for more than 2 years. The final study visits have been completed for all patients. The ongoing quality review of all data is being completed at the study sites, and the data readout is planned for mid-2020. There is excellent continued operational progress in our strategic partnership for this candidate with Grunenthal in Europe in order to complete our clinical protocol design, obtain regulatory input, and receive clearance from the European Regulatory Agency to begin a European phase 3 trial that will be complementary to the US phase 3 trial. And the results from both trials will be considered pivotal in order to support regulatory approvals in both US and Europe. Finally, if we could move to slide 31, this slide highlights our major upcoming operational milestones for the next 12 months, and they're identified by product candidates. For Remestemcel-L, or steroid-refractory acute graft-versus-host disease, the product Ryoncil has received priority review. We are interacting with the agency at present, and a PDUFA date is set for September 30th. If approved, the U.S. launch for Ryoncil is planned for shortly thereafter. And in parallel, we will be expanding investigator-initiated clinical trials for chronic graft-versus-host disease and other indications of the product candidate. Specifically with respect to remestemcel-L in acute respiratory distress syndrome due to COVID-19, as I've mentioned, the active phase 3 trial is ongoing in its recruitment across up to 30 sites in North America. The trial will complete within 3 to 4 months enrollment, and we hope to establish strategic partnerships for both manufacturing and commercialization for this indication. Revascor for advanced and end-stage heart failure will read out the phase 3 trial results in mid-2020, and we expect to initiate a confirmatory trial in end-stage heart failure in patients with LVADs. Finally, for chronic inflammatory low back pain, as I've mentioned earlier, the data readout will be in mid-2020 for the phase 3 trial, and we will work closely with our partner to obtain clearance to begin a European trial for the same indication. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody and open it up now for questions to myself, Dr. Fred Grossman, and Josh Muntner. Thank you.
Thank you. Your first question comes from Louise Chen from Cantor. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions here. So my first question for you is, how fast do you think this ARDS trial will enroll, and when can we expect to see an interim readout here? Second question is, we often get asked by investors, which data set do you expect to see first, the heart failure or chronic low back pain? And if you can't say, if you could just help us think through that, that would be great. And last question here is that you had noted that in December 2019, your phase 3 heart failure trial surpassed the number of primary endpoints for completion. And just curious what needs to be done from that point on to the middle of this year before we can see the results. Thank you.
Thank you. So those are three sets of questions. Let's take the first question to Dr. Grossman. Fred, could you address recruit in the ARDS trial and interim analysis, please?
Yes. Yes, Silviu. Thank you for the question, Louise. So as mentioned before, the study has started and patients have been recruited. We're expecting, as noted before, the study to be completed in 3 to 4 months. We are carefully choosing the top medical centers, and many of which are in hotspots around the country, in North America. And we're recruiting up to 300 patients across 30 sites. In terms of the interim analysis, the first interim analysis will be when 30% have completed the primary efficacy variable. That should take about 2 months or so, and at that point, depending on how many have completed, an independent board will be reviewing the data for substantial efficacy and futility. And at that point, if there's substantial efficacy, then they may recommend that the study stops.
Maybe we can address the second question, Louise. Second question was, which of the two trials will read out first, heart or back pain? And I would say we're not in control of those. And really it's part of the same as your third question, which was since the minimum number of events were accrued in December, how long does it take to close the trial out? The minimum number was correct, but we needed to have all patients followed up for at least 12 months in the heart failure trial. The last patient 12-month follow-up occurred, I believe, end of January, early February. So we had a requirement for 12-month follow-up in all patients. That meant that we weren't in a position to start closing out that trial until after the last patient had his 12-month visit. And so we will have something like 10-15% primary endpoint events more than the minimum requirement by the FDA, which is a good thing. And the team is very much in the process of cleaning up the data and interfacing with the CRO whose responsibility it is to ensure that all data are accurate and error-free. And to do that, they have to verify lots of components, obviously, at the sites, at the source. And that goes for both the heart failure program and the back pain program. And that's currently being completed. Fred, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that covered it. We want to make sure that the data are pristine, and we have a very robust process to make sure that all the data are clean, and that at the end of the day, when it's analyzed, the results are robust and perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Your next question comes from Jeffrey Cohen from Ladenburg Goldman. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi, Silviu, Josh, and Fred. How are you?
Hi.
Fine, thank you.
So, a few questions. Fred, could you talk to us a little bit about the ARDS trial and give us a sense of the size of the subset that we know about there, at least in the United States, as far as the ARDS subset from the total patient population or the total hospitalized population? And then can you remind us of the delta, the time between the two infusions, at least in the short trial amongst 12 patients? And talk to us about the number of sites which are currently enrolled. I think you stated that you would have up to 30. And what kind of time frame do you think we'll see? I think you said 3 to 4 months. And what kind of interim look might you get a look at or we get a look at? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So let me start with the dosing first. So the dosing and the criteria that we used for the 12 patients is the same dosing and criteria that we're using for the randomized placebo-controlled trial. Patients receive 2 doses of remestemcel L, separated by 3 to 5 days in the first week. So the first week they will have received 2 doses, both in the 12-patient emergency IND as well as in the randomized clinical trial. The randomized clinical trial, as mentioned before, is across 30 sites. Many of these sites are in hotspot areas. So as you know, across the country, there are some states where the number of hospitalizations are flat or going down somewhat, others where it's going up. It's certainly predicted that now that the country is opening up, that there's going to be some spikes. So we're making sure that we're covering most of the country so that we can hopefully get those patients enrolled in our study. It's very hard to determine what the total number of COVID ARDS patients there are, but obviously it's very substantial. We're hearing now that in Alabama, for example, the ICUs are full. So this is a very substantial population. I will point out that we're focusing on the severe cases. We're focusing on those with moderate to severe ARDS. There's no one in that space. There's no competition in that space, and hence there's a tremendous medical need to come up with treatments that reduce the mortality, because as mentioned by Silviu before, the mortality is quite high. So depending on the pace of enrollment, as we noted before, we expect the enrollment to complete in 3 to 4 months, and then allowing for another month after that for the last patient to get to the 30-day period. That's about the time that the study will complete. We'll analyze the data. We have both primary and secondary outcomes measures in that trial. As noted before, we are including interim analysis, and the first interim will be when 30% of the subjects have met or completed the primary efficacy variable. That would be about 90 to 100 patients. And depending on the enrollment, I'm anticipating anywhere from 2 months or so. Again, it depends on the enrollment for the first interim look, and that will be by an independent committee. If they determine, based on general criteria of efficacy and futility, that the study should stop for efficacy, then that will be their recommendation. At that point, we will make a decision to perhaps stop the trial and move forward with our discussions for potential approval in COVID ARDS. Did I answer your question?
That's very helpful. Yeah, that's very helpful. A couple more follow-ons. One is there a second interim look at 60% or 70%? And then, in addition, can you give us a sense of how many IRBs are locked down as of today?
Well, we have 3 interim looks during this trial. So the interim looks are going to occur at 30, 45, and 60%. So there's quite a few periods where the independent board is going to look at this data. And the reason that we built this into it was based on the signal, the strong signal we saw in the 12 patients. If it holds up, then it's quite possible that the study could start early. However, we're planning for the study to go to completion and cover those 300 patients. But again, we can hear very early that the study is to be stopped. I'm sorry, what was the second question that you asked?
Can you give us a sense of the number of IRBs?
Yeah, I mean, we're recruiting sites very quickly. We started fast. There's tremendous interest in the study. So we're getting calls for many sites around the country who want to take part in this because, as I noted before, there's no one in this space. Most of the other studies, whether they're antivirals or other treatments, are including milder patients as well as those who are critical. We're focusing purely on those that are on ventilators who are moderate to severe ARDS. And therefore, there are many sites that are engaged. We have quite a few sites already signed up. We have many patients who are in the trial, and we look forward to continuing this pace.
Okay, got it. So one more question, if I may, on a different topic, I guess for Silviu on the VASCOR. Could you talk to us a little bit about if the data comes out positive mid-year, is that going to be enough to file with, in your opinion, to the agency here? And could you also just define for us in greater detail what stage you'd be going after with that label as far as the heart failure stage and any IMAC classifications? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So, you see the common theme of what we're targeting in terms of each disease area. We're targeting the most severe patients where alternatives don't exist. We've done that with severe end-stage, severe advanced grades GVHD, CD disease. We're doing that with COVID-19 ARDS, severe ARDS with a very high mortality rate. And we're also doing that with severe heart failure. So the patients that we've enrolled are those patients at somewhere between 80 to 85% who've got very severe, very large left ventricles and a substantial risk of mortality over an 18 to 24-month period. Very much a mortality risk that resembles, in many ways, certain cancers. And these patients have progressed to this advanced stage despite all maximal existing standard of care therapies. We've even gone beyond this group of patients in patients who are otherwise moribund but being kept alive really on artificial mechanical devices, left ventricular assist devices. And in that setting, again, we've seen strong signals of efficacy, as I stated earlier. So if we see a significant benefit on mortality in this 566 patient trial, together with the data that we've already seen in the ischemic end-stage heart failure patients with LVADs, it's the totality of the data that will potentially allow us to have a very meaningful discussion with the agency.
Yep. Okay, that does it for me. Thanks very much for taking the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your next question comes from Jason Colbert from Dawson James Securities. Please go ahead.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all your hard work. I mean, it's been a terrible pandemic. With that said, there's a couple of questions I have. I know that you guys are highly connected and some of your board members are highly connected to DOD and BARDA, and I'm just trying to understand what the interest level might be for a BARDA procurement, at the end of data, and how long does the U.S. government wait to get data? This is not, do they wait for a completion of a clinical trial? Do they get good interim data and make a procurement effort? How much time are you spending in Washington? How active is that process?
That's a fairly complex question you've asked, Jason. I would start out by saying clearly data drive any discussions with BARDA and procurement. And I think, we have those discussions ongoing. But I think, the disease needs to be looked at in various ways. COVID-19 and ARDS is clearly the major focus for us and for regulators, and ultimately for the government at large. If we can make a meaningful impact on mortality and get these patients off ventilators and out of ICU, that will have a tremendous impact on healthcare utilization, as well as patient well-being, of course, and outcomes. Beyond that, there's the opportunity to use the product for not just COVID-19, but for influenza ARDS and more broader causes of ARDS, including sepsis, bacterial sepsis, etc. So, this is the beginning of a discussion, and whether the right approach is stockpiling, which is what you're referring to, versus our ability to manufacture sufficient product through capacity expansion that is a commercial initiative together with strategic commercial partners, or a combination of both. Right? A partnership with commercial pharmaceutical companies in the space together with the U.S. government. A combination of all of those things may be the way to go. But I think it's, we are in discussions with parties at both at the level of commercial and government. And I think the clinical data will underpin those outcomes. We are well financed now to put in place the initial manufacturer requirements that will underpin the capacity initiatives required for meeting the outcomes if the phase 2 trial are positive.
Silviu, your answer makes perfect sense, and that's exactly how I would answer the question as a scientist or as a clinician. But I also know, these are unusual times, and politically things can move very, very rapidly. Let me ask a slightly different question to Dr. Grossman. One of the really interesting things that's becoming understood is that many of these patients who do come out of ventilators and induced comas have many other after effects. So it would be really, really interesting to be able to not only analyze mortality, but, the many secondary endpoints that will determine not only if patients recover faster and are not necessarily as acute, and whether they recover more completely and fully. And so can you touch a little bit in terms of the things that you're tracking, even if they're not the primary endpoint and top of mind?
Yeah. First of all, I agree with you. I think that many of these patients, in fact, when they come off a ventilator, have sequelae for quite some time. One of the reasons that in our trial and in the 12 patients, we have treatment initiated with remestemcel L within 72 hours of being on a ventilator is because we want rapid resolution of treatment. And as you heard before, there is a median number of days of 10 days off of a ventilator. The longer you're on the ventilator, the greater the chance of having long-term effects, such as fibrosis. So we're gearing our treatment early in the process of patients being on a ventilator. Also, in our randomized clinical trial, we have a whole variety of secondary outcome measures, including 60 and 90 days post-ventilation, beyond just mortality. We're looking at a variety of factors. We're also looking at biomarkers, which are really critical here, because as you heard before, the cells are stimulated by cytokines, and they release anti-inflammatory factors. And we want to measure what they are, and we're doing so in the study. So I agree fully with you. It's very important to look at the long-term effects, but we're trying to get to these patients early so that we can have complete resolution beyond just reducing mortality, which in and of itself is important.
Understood. Thank you, Dr. Grossman. And the last question, Silviu, and, I'm gritting my teeth to ask this, but I think I should ask it, and I think we should address it. Yeah, U.S.-China relations right now are pretty tenuous. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on, whether it's Hong Kong or whether it's U.S. trade or whether it's the source of COVID. How could this or might this affect you and your relationship with Tasly? And I did hear you say that you realized a milestone from Tasly. I think that's positive. How is Mesoblast protecting this deal and protecting its intellectual property going forward?
Look, we have an excellent relationship with Tasly, and I certainly, don't want to discuss politics on this call one way or the other, but our relationship with Tasly is a commercial one, and it's an excellent relationship. In terms of intellectual property, our arrangements, with respect to the initial phases, at least, are to provide products on a commercial arm's length basis in terms of supply. Over time, we will work out our arrangements with respect to commercial manufacturing and distribution, and certainly protection of intellectual property is a critical aspect of the relationship, and I have no reason to think that this relationship will continue to be anything but strong and growth-oriented over time.
Okay, good. And one last question, and first of all, congratulations to you and Josh on raising capital. I think that made a lot of sense given the move in the stock price. When I look at, the risk and the reward in the stock, I'm very excited about what I believe is going to be very powerful results in COVID. And I know you kind of addressed this, but I'd like to put it specifically in the frame of reference of what we're going to, see COVID, degenerative disc disease, and congestive heart failure. We're going to see that data all coming together in about the same time. It would be really interesting to know, what data might come when in terms of the sequence, but I guess that's not really up to you. But how do you look at that?
I think the most important thing to look at in the short term is Mesoblast's go-to-market strategy, right? So our remestemcel product for its first indication, GVHD, with a brand name Ryoncil, is first and foremost the value driver for the company. We are in advanced discussions with the agency. We're under a priority review. The team is led by Dr. Grossman is buried in interactions, discussions, responses, and the focus for the company is to get this product approved and successfully launched. And we've invested in a targeted commercial sales force led by Eric Strati in our organization. That sales force will be focused on at least the 50% of transplant centers the 15 sites in the U.S. that do 50% of the pediatric transplants. We have invested in inventory to support the successful launch. And that's clearly the short-term value driver for the company. And then the value driver beyond that will be ensuring that there's appropriate data to support label extensions for the product and broadening of the indications. And COVID-19 ARDS is an example of that. Our ability to leverage the many years of safety and efficacy data generated with remestemcel, not just for GVHD, but in other areas like Crohn's disease and inflammatory lung disease, will allow us to move to new indications. And as you've seen, our partner in Japan has moved into areas like HIE, otherwise known as blue baby syndrome, and epidermolysis bullosa, data to which we will have access and use for the U.S. market. We intend to move hard and to work with investigators that are leaders in the space to generate the kind of data that will support label extensions for the product. Underpinning all of that will have to be our manufacturing strategy, and that was a major rationale for why we raised capital recently. We have to be able to invest in capacity enlargement. Contractual discussions are underway, and we have to be in a position to anticipate positive readouts and not skip a beat with respect to the ability to have inventory to launch products for indications beyond acute GVHD, and that includes, of course, COVID-19 ARDS. With respect to readouts in the phase 3 trials, as you say, they're not under our control. What is under our control is successful launch, successful presentations to the agency, and successful ability to commercialize products and build them out into new areas, and ensure that we generate the sort of revenues that this platform technology can deliver for our stakeholders.
Silviu, Josh, Dr. Grossman, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time today, and really look forward to the interim analysis in ARDS related to COVID. Could be a real breakthrough for the globe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your last question comes from Tanushree Jain from Bell Potter Securities. Please go ahead.
Hi, Silviu, Josh, and Fred. Thanks for taking my questions. Just a couple here from me. Just on the GVHD, do we have any visibility about the advisory committee date as yet? And then just on the second one, given TEMCELL's approved in Japan for GVHD, is there any plans or discussions with JCR to pursue the COVID-19 ARDS opportunity for Japan? And then my last question is just on the manufacturing. Over the next 2 quarters, I guess, Josh, this is more for you, before we see the ARDS trial results, and I think also assuming that there is a possibility that the trial could be stopped early for efficacy on an interim analysis, I guess how should we be looking at the spend on increasing the manufacturing capacity over the next 2 quarters?
So can I have Fred address the first question, please?
Yes. The advisory committee is planned for August. We're in discussions right now with the FDA regarding format and content, and we're really looking forward to presenting to the committee.
Josh, could you address the spend over the next period, please?
Sure. I think I'll echo some of Silviu's comments from earlier. It's important to make sure that we have the capacity to meet the requirements of our maturing pipeline, including this opportunity to treat ARDS COVID-19 patients. At this point, we don't have any contractual arrangements, but we're working on putting them in place, and we'll provide updates to the market as we do so.
Tony, does that address those questions?
The JCR one as well, and I think then I'll just have a follow-up for Josh with respect to the contractual obligations. Are we just going to look at adding, I guess, another manufacturing suite with Lonza, or are we also going to be considering other self-manufacturers?
So maybe I can address that, Tony, for you first. So there's obviously ability to build out capacity in Singapore with the existing arrangements with Lonza. But we're given the importance of COVID-19 in the U.S., we are looking at having expansion capabilities for production in the U.S. And so we're in discussions with multiple parties, including Lonza, of course, in the U.S. to access those facilities existing and otherwise for increased production for remestemcel and its applications, as well as down the track for other of our important products with high volumes. So those discussions are underway, and we're evaluating our options. The question with JCR, we have a very strong relationship with JCR. They are primarily focused on orphan indications as a company strategically, and that has driven so far their interest in acute GVHD, epidermolysis bullosa, and hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy in children, in neonates. COVID-19 is not an orphan disease, obviously, and we've had initial discussions with JCR, but we're also having those discussions more broadly, and I think we'll update folks over time as to our strategic initiatives in Japan, in the US, in Europe, etc., with respect to COVID-19.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. That brings us to the end of today's call. I'll now hand back to Dr. Itescu for closing remarks.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate everybody's interest today. Clearly, the last 3 months have been incredibly busy and strong quarter for us as a company. I think it's put Mesoblast well and truly at the forefront of providing a potential therapy to combat this devastating disease, COVID-19. And I think it speaks greatly to the strength of the underlying technology that Mesoblast is developing, as well as the more than a decade of clinical data that's been generated in terms of both safety and efficacy and understanding the mechanisms of action that allow us at a time of devastation, that really is the only word I can use, that has been caused by COVID-19 pandemic. We're able to pivot and use all of our know-how and expertise and work diligently and feverishly, really, to attempt to provide a therapeutic solution to the many, many, many patients who are affected by this virus and who have a very high risk of death due to this terrible inflammatory condition of the lungs. And we hope to update the market as soon as we possibly can. Thank you very much.